Welcome to the Healing Center Conversations podcast, where we create space for conversations that heal. I'm your host, Dr. Byron McClure, a nationally certified school psychologist. I, along with our special guests, will give you insight to promote collective healing by putting people first. Through weekly conversations with educators, psychologists, and healers, we'll discuss ways to heal, thrive, and live your best life. This is the Healing Center Conversations podcast. Welcome to the Healing Center Conversations podcast, where we create space for healing-centered conversations. I'm your host, Dr. Byron McClure. We have a very special guest with us today, Mr. Tre Gammage. Tre is the Dean of Students and an SEL Consultant. He's always had a passion for helping others. With a vast background in speaking, podcasting, and consulting, Tre was once told, when you see someone living their dream, it makes you want to be a part of that dream. And he's been living by that motto ever since. He has a myriad of experiences in teaching and public speaking. He's equipped with the tools to bring your self-enhancement goals to life. Tre, welcome to the Healing Center Conversations podcast.
Thank you, sir. It's my pleasure to be here. Welcome to the podcasting space, and I'm excited to have a Healing Center conversation.
Absolutely, man. Look, as we jump into it, I want to get right into it. And as I did my research, reading up a little bit about you, I read somewhere where you once said, life is all about the dash. Break that down for us and the listeners. And what's the meaning of life is all about the dash?
Absolutely. So honestly, Byron, it's a quote that's been said by a lot of people before myself. But I think something that stood out for me was when I was in college. I played football at Miami, Ohio, and we had a coach who was crazy as all outdoors. But this was something that really stood with me and stood with our team. He asked us, sat us down in the defensive meeting room and said, look, y'all, today is whatever, and this is game day. What's the most important thing that I just wrote on the board? And we all started saying, today is game day, it's the practice. He said, no, it's life is all about the dash. It's what you do between now and then that's going to determine the outcome. And so, man, when I heard that, it truly, truly resonated with me. And I started to think about the dash as your dash of life. It's the long term and it's the short term. So in the short term, the dash is every decision that you make every single day. And over time, those decisions that you make in the day become your dash, which I believe is your blueprint and the legacy that you're leaving for those that come behind you.
Tre, that's really powerful stuff, man. And I know that you went on to do some really great work. You're currently doing a number of exceptional things. Part of that work, you actually released a workbook called Every Decision Counts. 8 lessons I wish they taught me in school. Tre, can you share a little bit about this book?
Absolutely, man. This was, it's hard to say where the book actually started, but in my experience and what my coach talked about with the dash, that's kind of where Every Decision Counts comes from. And I made some mistakes in college, and I had some healing that I needed as a young man myself. And so there was a lot of lessons that I felt like I had learned through life that I really just wish were taught in school. And so some of those lessons were about how failing is your first attempt in learning. And that's how you get started on your journey, on your life's path, is by that it's okay to make mistakes. Just try not to make the same one twice so you can make new mistakes. And another one that's been a favorite of the students that have adopted the book is Only Quality People. How do you surround yourself with only quality people? Are you surrounded by sharks, people that are only moving forward and only being positive with a growth mindset? Or are you surrounded by crabs, folks that are pulling you down and won't allow you to get ahead? So those are 3 lessons that I learned from life, and some podcast interviews that helped me create these lessons that were literally letters to students. As I wrote the book, Dear Byron, this is what you need to know about failure. And so I was writing letters to my little brothers, to some of the students that I've taught, and wanted to make it in an easily digestible way an action-oriented book. And I've gotten great feedback from students and adults alike. Use these skills and activities in the book for a variety of skill building.
Excellent. And Trey, going off script a little bit here, I'm interested to hear a little bit more about your experience in college and if there was one instance in particular that might have shaped your college experience or your life, or something that you learned during that time.
Man, college was honestly it was rough. It was very hard for me. I earned a scholarship to play ball in college. Miami was the only school that had offered me, and where a lot of folks go into school with the specifically football players, scholarship athletes, their emphasis is on going to the league, on practicing, and on working hard. But fortunately, I had a lot of these lessons that I should have learned in school that I learned from life. I went to 8 different schools. I moved 11 different times. I had a lot of support that really helped me understand that, hey, football is what you do, but it's not who you are. And so that was always in my head. But I would say that the turning point in college was a failed drug test. A lot of what I mentioned, a lot of the struggles that I was going through, girlfriend cheated on me, missing my friends, didn't fit in with my teammates. They were very alpha male, and I am not that way. I'm not a naturally aggressive person. So I had to really mentally flip a switch to be able to go to practice. It would take me 20 minutes of listening to Lil Boosie or Young Dro in the locker room so I could be geared up to go and hit folks. It just wasn't natural for me. And so that drug test, I had been tested several times and was just at a place like, man, I'm not worried about this anymore. Let me smoke. Let me get high. Let me ease my pain. And sure enough, that very next day, I failed a drug test. And a $50,000 scholarship flashed before my eyes. Think about telling my parents that I lost this. Am I going to get kicked off the team? Like, is everybody going to know? It was just a big wake up call. And that's where the idea of, hey, every decision counts, Trey. Like you got this scholarship, you got this opportunity. You can't throw this away. And so from there, I took a wonderful journey down motivation and inspiration and public speaking and all these types of things that helped me get to a place of culmination for every decision counts. And some of these stories, that story is in the book. I've got stories from high school, from college, from my personal journey that helped shape every decision counts.
Man, that's sensational, and I think we really can learn a lot from our own experiences. Someone once told me that it's even better to learn from the experiences of others as well. And it sounds like that's exactly what you're doing in this book. And I also read that part of the book teaches youth in particular to learn how to turn those big and small failures into a platform for access or a platform for success. So why do you think learning from failures is an important lesson?
Man, so in the book I share with folks a few things. I don't know if you remember Kid President
Yeah.
from back in the day, little boy with a suit and tie. He had a bone disease where his bones were essentially brittle. And he started making those videos while he was in the hospital. He had broken like 93 bones by the time he was 12 years old, but his spirit could not be broken. And he was always so positive. He was always so happy that he had to move forward and share his positivity with the world. That might not be a traditional failure, but think about the pain he had to go through and how that sparked his success. You look at Michael Jordan, missed 50%. That's an F. He failed half the shots that he took. A Hall of Fame baseball player hits the ball 3 out of every 10 times. Failure is a part of life. Les Brown says that you're going to hear no 17 times for every yes. So get used to it. Get used to failing. If you're not failing, that means you're not trying. If you're not trying, that means you're probably scared of something. Another lesson in the book about making mistakes is simply raise your hand. We might get into it a little bit later, but in my public speaking journey on the world to the World Championship of Public Speaking, to be the #1 speaker in the world, the first 2 out of 6 rounds of competition, I was the only speaker. If somebody else would have competed, they may have very well beaten me. But just because I was willing to put my name in the hat, because I was willing to enter the competition, I won. So it was scary, and I saved those speeches, and they were awful. Like the first couple speeches were bad. I think the second one I literally read from my phone, and I could do that because nobody else was competing. So I took that failure and it allowed me to learn and grow from it. So failure is your first attempt in learning, and you got to get used to it because it's always going to be a part of your life if you want to experience joy, happiness, success, and whatever other positivity there is. You have to be willing to go through the defeat, the pain, the despair that goes with it, because life is like a pendulum. You can only have as much of one as you're willing to sacrifice or suffer for the other.
That's really good stuff, Trey. And I'm interested. I'm happy that you brought that up, the public speaking piece. I'm fascinated by that. And doing a little bit of research, I see that you were a top 100 speaker in the world. So share a little bit with the listeners of how you became a top speaker, and really, if you had a primary message that you were trying to convey to people, what your message was.
Absolutely. So if I can go back and forth a little bit to college. So I mentioned that failed drug test. I was able to get myself together and go into my senior year becoming a starter. But something different that I did, it was elected to forego my 5th year of playing football. I was tired of beating up my body. I was tired of the grind. Didn't feel like I could do it again. I went abroad to study in Europe. We had a sister campus in Luxembourg, and I spent 4 months, 16 weeks traveling to 14 different countries, listening to amazing speakers like Les Brown, Jim Rohn, Zig Ziglar, Napoleon Hill, Earl Nightingale, and I was sharpening myself. And probably the coolest thing about being abroad, I didn't have Wi-Fi, I didn't have a phone plan, nothing like that. So as I was traveling Italy, the Czech Republic, the Netherlands, all I had was my mind. All I had was my thoughts. And I learned about Toastmasters, and Les Brown, who I consider to be the greatest speaker of all time. He won the Golden Gavel Award through Toastmasters. So I was doing my research. What's Toastmasters? What's this? What's this? I joined Toastmasters with the ambition of being the #1 speaker in the world. So right after I graduated, I moved down to South Carolina, joined the Toastmasters group, and started on my journey. So you had to complete Toastmasters. If I can give an aside there, wonderful organization. If you're a teacher, there's so many stories of people who are scared to speak that got promotions because they took some classes, because they gained the confidence. So I went in with the intent of being a world champion speaker, but some people go in with the intent of getting a promotion in their job, of being a better leader, of all kinds of things like that. But fast forward, in the World Championship of Public Speaking is an annual competition with over 30,000 contestants from 143 countries, and they compete for this title annually, the World Champion of Public Speaking. And so this year, I mentioned the first 2 rounds already. Nobody competed against me, so I won those. The third round, continued to get better, working on the same speech. Fourth round, continuing to get better, working on the same speech. That was at the state level. When you win at the state level, or in my case, it was the district, I went on to compete against the top 100 speakers in the world. And so my semifinal round, if I can brag a little bit, has been called one of the best semifinal rounds of all time. That year we had the #3 speaker in the world. And this past year, the #3 speaker in the world in the 2021 competition, Roger Caesar, actually just won as well. We had several people that also went on to compete in the top 30. So that experience, Byron, was the best speech I've ever given in my life, but it was also, I say, the worst. And it was the best because it was so well crafted. It took me 6 months to write literally the perfect speech. I knew how many words were in there. I knew when my jokes were coming. I knew the gestures that I was going to use. But in that, I hid the story that I was afraid to tell. And that's what came out in coaching as well. Trey, what's the story you're afraid to tell? And that had to be your message to the world. So my message was actually every decision counts. And through the story, still didn't tell the whole truth, like I mentioned, but that was the first time that my dad had heard about my failed drug test. So that was part of the healing center that came from it. It was very cathartic for me to put, honestly, my life journey into this message, into a 5 to 7 minute speech. And so if you listen back to the first few rounds of the speech, you'll hear me talk about my childhood. You'll hear me talk about problems that I had with my life. And then that semifinal speech was the culmination and the story that I felt like I could hand deliver to the world. And the story was every decision counts, which ultimately after that, a light bulb went off. At first, I was mad, Byron. I know I'm getting long-winded here, but I went first in the competition. World champion of Japan, Turkey, Ohio, New York. These were all in my semifinal round. So I went first. And when I got off, as soon as I got off the stage, I knew I lost. And part of that was the crowd wasn't warmed up, and I'm a very passionate speaker. So had I gone fifth or sixth, it would have just been a different energy. But as soon as I stepped off the stage, I knew I lost. And I started to soak, and I started to be upset. But as I looked at my other competitors, they were happy. They were sharing headphones. They were singing. They were dancing. And it was a different kind of competition. Coming from football, competing means that I got to beat you. I have to be better than you. In this world championship, I started to recognize that all I can do is be my best self. And when I started hearing everybody else go, all it did was humble me and help me relax to recognize, hey, these are the top 100 speakers in the world. And just because you aren't finishing in the top three doesn't mean that your speech wasn't valuable, because everybody here has went through what I've went through. And so that sparked a whole nother change that got me into SEL, that got me into politics, and got me into some other things as well.
Trey, what's fascinating about that story is not just you're a top 100 speaker, but going back to your time playing college ball, the failed drug test, then having the opportunity to study abroad. I'm captivated by this healing centered journey that you really went on. And then participating in the top 100 was healing in and of itself, as you wanted to convey something to your father, which it seems he means a lot to you.
Mm-hmm.
And even in that space, being able to reach a point where it's, I know to be an even more captivating speaker, my story is going to be what resonates with people. And it seems that when you walked off that stage, like all of those things were kind of coming together to really craft this fit oil machine that is Trey, that then propelled into politics and some of the things that you're doing now. So, yeah, I would love for you to go ahead. You got it.
So I want to go, because it's healing centered conversations. And part of the reason I was so excited about it is to really be open and vulnerable, about my healing journey. And so part of the story that I was really afraid to tell was about how I felt rejected by my father growing up. And so this is a story I've told on my podcast. And at this point, it's a story that I'm not afraid to tell, have told after that opportunity. But growing up, my dad essentially didn't tell his family that I was his son. So it was a two-family type of situation. And I always took that. My father saw me. My dad was a great dad. Still don't have a thing bad to say about him. But I had a sense of rejection and a feeling of not being wanted that I didn't know how to deal with. So going through high school, getting my scholarship was for my dad. Being a great player was for my dad. Being a great student was for my dad. All of that, I wanted him to tell me he was sorry, to tell me he loved me, to tell me he made a mistake. And when I got back from being abroad, literally on the plane back from Europe, I was crying. It was a 9-hour flight back. I cried about half of it. And I watched a movie called Crazy Stupid Love that triggered me. And I was just crying, thinking about this conversation I needed to have with my dad. And I'd had the conversation with my mother, with my stepmother, with all my siblings, but I was always too afraid to go directly to my dad and ask him the questions that I had. And so I got off that plane from Europe and I went straight to my dad and I said, Dad, why don't you love me, man? How could you do this to me? And I know he was shocked, because his first response was, you really think I don't love you? And it was like, yo, okay, I'm getting somewhere. And that healing, that's the healing that I really needed. That's the healing that was still hard for me to share when I was up on that stage, but that was the story that I should have told the world about how I overcame that. And honestly, I don't think I had been healed all the way at that point, because the conversations, there was 3 different conversations that I had with my dad that lasted about 10 hours. And it was every conversation, every question. I said some things to my dad that maybe you wouldn't normally say to your father, but I had to get it out. I had to put it all on the table. Every question, everything that I had talked about with everybody else, I had to bring to my father. And then the culmination was, my dad never made a decision to hurt me. His decisions affected me, yes, but it wasn't about putting Tre in this position. And so that was something that I had to come to terms with, as well as that I can't base my life and my happiness or my success based off of a decision my father made 25 years ago. I've got to be able to heal from that and move past it. So I didn't necessarily get the answer that I wanted, but I got the healing that I needed to be able to move forward from it.
And moving forward from that, did you feel that that conversation allowed you the healing that you needed to do the things that you're doing now?
It was a release. Whereas before I felt like I needed, because I was fearing rejection and afraid of rejection, now I was no longer seeking that acceptance. And because I was able to acknowledge my fear, I was able to acknowledge my pain, that allowed me to let it go and move on from it. And so that's what came, that all of that is the stories that came through my speeches. Like the journey to the world championship, literally that's what I was going through into that healing. And so my speeches were ways of kind of encapsulating the healing parts of what I had gone through. But yes, I was able to, I still, great happiness, I call my dad because I love his approval and I appreciate his approval, but I'm not doing it for his approval. And so after that, I was able to be bold enough or confident enough to walk my own path, make my own decisions, whether that's moving to South Carolina with my family in Indiana, getting married, leaving my job to start looking at buying a house. Some good decisions, some bad decisions. I kind of felt like I stepped into my manhood, if you will, or I let go of part of the childish mentality that it's my parents' fault.
Yeah. And Tre, sometimes as people, man, we need that release. And it seems that that series of conversations, it was a culminating series of conversations, but it allowed you to have that release, that emotional release that kind of gave you permission to feel okay and to heal and move forward constructively. And so after the conversations with your father, after the emotional release, what did you do next? Like, what was next for you?
Yeah, so, man, that's a good one, because I feel like the last conversation might have been just before that world championship, I want to say. And so from there, that world championship, those conversations culminating, I knew that life is all about me and it's not at all about me. And it's all about me because, like we said about the dash, all I can control is the decisions that I'm making every day. But it's not about me because I feel like the speech that I told, and the healing that I had was about me, but the secret to living is given. And that's something that I had, I guess, tugged and pulled with. So I make the decision, but the decisions that I make, the stories that I tell are not all about me. And so I felt like my greatest gift that I had was as a bridge between generations. And working in schools, I was young enough to where I could translate the information from our elders or from the teachers to the kids, and they got it, and that was still cool. And vice versa, I could let the adults know. I was able to translate what the kids needed or what they wanted to them and kind of bridge the gap there. So honestly, I kept exploring. I looked at buying a house. That didn't go through, fortunately. I looked at executive speaking and training type of thing. I started doing communication trainings and workshops. I got into emotional intelligence as well. And I think shortly thereafter, about a year later, I decided to run for office in my small town where I was at. So continued trying to find myself and find my next lane. And yeah, on all that for a while. But I'll let you go with that where you want to go next.
No, that's exciting stuff, and I'm really intrigued to hear what that experience running for city council was like.
Yeah, for sure. So this is another like healing centered kind of piece. Again, something that I've shared before, but I know on your platform it'll reach a new audience as well. But when that 2016 election came around, man, that was right after so the speech competition was August, elections were November. I wasn't feeling it. I wasn't feeling Trump. I wasn't feeling Hillary. It was silly to me. And I couldn't believe the country is that this is the kind of race that we're running. So I didn't vote. And I felt even worse once Trump got elected. But what that did to me on the positive side, it was another wake up call that, okay, Tre, what you got to do something now. If this fool can win, what can you do? And probably what even sparked that further, my cousin Keith Gammage in Atlanta was elected as Solicitor General and had a restorative justice campaign. That was my introduction to restorative justice. Took me down another path there. But when I decided to run for council, it was interesting. So the incumbent was elected the same year I was born. She was elected in 93. I was born in 93. She was about 84 years old. The city where I lived in was an all-American city, but in the South, you're South. And I don't know about the South Carolina South, but in Hartsville or in South Carolina, there's two sides of the city. It's not overt racism. It is overt racism. No, it's the opposite of overt racism. Covert racism, benevolent racism. It's just streets you don't cross. If there's an event in town, it's either for white folks or it's for black folks. If you live on the left side of the street, it's for you. If you live on the right side of the street, it's for you. And so the neighborhood was very divided. And so twofold, I was leaving my job, start consulting full time, and I wanted a way to serve. And so that was my opportunity to serve. We put a small team together to go out and campaign, to put a plan together. And Byron, another experience of just service, I broke my city down, or my division down, into about, it was 1,500 people. So I split it into smaller sections. And every day for about 2 or 4 hours, I go knock on doors and ask for votes. I didn't find out till later, everybody will tell you they'll vote for you, but nobody go to the polls. So I ended up winning the election 56 votes to 46 votes to 36 votes. Not a large margin. We had to do a runoff. The runoff total was 69 to 47. And what stands out to me is 69 people changed my life. And those people elected me into an honorable position to serve a community of 8,000 and manage a $10 million budget and to do a lot of other things. So I think a lot of times we might think of running for office or trying, again, going back to failure, as like this big grandiose thing, but 69 people is not a lot. When it came down to it, everybody that said yes, we wrote down their name, we wrote down their phone number, we wrote down their address, and on the runoff day, we went to their house and either asked if they voted already, got them a ride to go vote, made sure that it happened. So it made success and victory very practical. This is what I have to do to get these votes, and these 69 votes changed the direction of my life and opened up opportunities to be on several boards, serve on committees, win different, or be celebrated for different projects and things. So that was certainly an experience that helped grow me up. And it even brought the average age of the city council, and ours in particular, was over 65 years old. But one of the greatest impacts that I'm most proud of is not just me, but after I ran, you're seeing other people run. We got a really progressive candidate that ran after me, who was a little bit older, but his ideology was amazing, and he had a great reputation in the city. Then another man, I was 24 when I was elected. He was 25. Another great young man was elected. Even I stepped down this year. The man who replaced me was a wonderful guy that replaced me. The new mayor that just ran is under 40. So from before I was elected, the average age was about 65 years old. Now it's about 45 years old. And so that's an impact that maybe I'm not directly accountable for, but that's the kind of change that I was hoping for when I got started.
And it sounds like you certainly had a positive impact, and you definitely brought some change to an area that sounds like it needed it. And is running for public office in your future?
I plead the fifth, man. You know, it's a wealthy man's game, so it's very hard to. It's not a full-time position. You're considered a full-time employee, but you have more of a part-time salary. So where I was as a professional, I just didn't have time to dedicate to my business, dedicate to my family, and still be dedicated to service. So while I am still in service, it's just not in that way. And so I think a big piece in being an elected official, your hands are actually tied in a lot of ways because you can't make a decision on your own. And there's a pace of government that is very slow. That takes a lot of buy-in. You've got to have a budget to get your actions and your desires met, and the planning that goes along with it. So there's so many pieces. So I'm grateful that I've learned about city government, because that I think is invaluable. But is it in my future? I have to wait till the future to be able to answer that more specifically.
Understood, understood. And we know for sure something that is in your future is adult SEL, and it's also in your present right now. So, can you share just a little bit about some of the work you're doing around adult SEL, and really what's your approach to adult SEL skill development?
Without a doubt. So honestly, everything ties back together. So I appreciate your research and being on the other side of the podcast, because I don't always think about some of these things, but it's helping me see how everything's kind of been tied together. So I didn't know what SEL was at first, but I understood that everybody communicates 100% of the time. And with my new skills as a world champion speaker, that was something I wanted to teach more and thought was more valuable, as well as emotional intelligence. I have a background in psychology in undergrad and did a lot of research there. So, emotional intelligence and communication, I thought that was my bread and butter. Come to find out, in education, that's called SEL. And so, where before I was focused on delivering these skills of emotional intelligence and communication, once I learned about SEL and dug deeper into it, I recognized that some providers had adult SEL listed as the third step in implementation. And that just didn't make sense to me. I don't understand how I can ask a school or a teacher to implement these skills when research is telling us that they've never learned the skills in the first place. So going back, I recognize that adults or students learn better when adults have strong SEL skills. And so I use some assessments, the DISC, observable behavior assessment, and also an emotional intelligence assessment, to quantify and give visuals behind things that you've always thought, maybe known about yourself in relationships, but could never put into words. And so a lot of what I do now, most of what I'm doing now, a lot of in-service training, professional development, centered around helping you build the core SEL skills of self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, social management, and responsible decision making through an adult assessment type of lens. So we're able to put the two together so that you're better equipped to be less stressed and more positive when you're in the classroom where you teach who you are.
And Trey has an amazing YouTube channel. If you're listening, make sure you go follow him at his YouTube channel. Hit up all his social media platforms. Make sure you give him a follow, and just reach out. He's a very humble guy, but he knows his stuff. Thank you for this Healing Center conversation. All the listeners, thanks for tuning in to the Healing Center Conversations podcast. Be sure to follow us across all social media platforms at Healing Convo Pod. Help us grow by liking, sharing, commenting, and leaving a positive review. Tell a friend to tell a friend about the Healing Center Conversation podcast. Take care.